Welcome to the debate. Tonight we're conducting a forensic examination of a 90-minute spell that I firmly believe will be etched onto the tombstone of Arsenal's Premier League campaign. We are talking about the events at Molineux, where a cruising, dominant Arsenal side, leading 2-0 mind you, managed to completely self-destruct against Wolverhampton Wanderers, the team currently propping up the entire division.
Yeah, it was a chaotic end of the match, no doubt about it. Molineux has always been a tricky place to go under the lights, but, well, to call it a tombstone feels like we're writing the obituary while the patient is still breathing. I mean, Arsenal are still top of the table, remember?
They are top of the table in name. But are they top in reality? That is the central question we are debating tonight. Did squandering a commanding 2-0 lead against the league's bottom side effectively hand the Premier League title to Manchester City? Now, my position as someone who has covered this club for a long time is unequivocal. Yes, it did. When you are 2-0 up against the absolute bottom team and you allow a collapse that culminates in a 19-year-old debutant scoring in the 94th minute, you haven't just dropped 2 points. You have surrendered the psychological initiative and you've handed the mathematics to a Manchester City side that simply does not forgive mistakes.
Right. And here is where I step in with, I hope, a dose of perspective. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that drawing 2-2 after being 2-0 up isn't a massive blow. It hurts. It's an absolute gut punch. But my argument is that declaring the title race completely over based on a freak occurrence, a debut goal deep in stoppage time, is just premature. The quality of this Arsenal team is still very evident. The narrative that they have somehow bottled the league ignores the context of the performance, which, let's be honest, for 80 minutes was professional and controlled. The margin for error is gone, yes, but the title, that is still in their hands if they respond correctly.
Let's get right into the position statements then, because I think we need to lay out exactly why this result is so catastrophic. This wasn't just a draw. It was a capitulation of leverage. Arsenal had the opportunity right there on a plate to open a 7-point gap at the summit of the Premier League. 7 points. Do you know what 7 points does to the psyche of a chasing team?
It puts pressure on them, sure.
It forces them to take risks, it creates doubt, but instead Arsenal walked away with a single point. And now the math has fundamentally shifted. The analysis on this is brutal. If Manchester City wins all their remaining games, they are champions, period. Arsenal no longer holds the pen. They aren't writing their own story anymore. They are now reduced to spectators hoping for a favor from someone else, while City entirely controls the narrative.
But hold on. You're basing your entire fatalistic outlook on the assumption that Manchester City will win every single remaining game. That is it's a massive statistical assumption. We are talking about the Premier League, arguably the most competitive league in the world.
It's a historical trend for them, though. We aren't just guessing.
I know they are strong, but
We are looking at the Guardiola machine. We know exactly what they do in the run-in. They become inevitable. But let's look at the immediate aftermath at Molineux. The images of Mikel Arteta watching in total disbelief. Why was he frozen on the touchline? Because he saw his team lose control against a side that shouldn't even be on the same pitch as them quality-wise. When you look at the manner of the goals, specifically the absolute calamity between Gabriel and David Raya, it speaks to a team that is cracking under the pressure. You cannot concede a 2-0 lead to Wolves and expect to hold off a juggernaut like Manchester City. That result was the sound of the door clicking shut.
see, I interpret those images entirely differently. Disbelief is the natural reaction to a 94th minute equalizer from a kid making his debut. It's a how on earth did that happen face, not a we lost the league face. Let me offer the contextual view here. You are focusing entirely on the destination, the final score, without looking at the journey of the match. For the vast majority of that game, Arsenal were excellent. Bukayo Saka's goal was a masterclass in precision. Then Piero Hincapié pops up, gets his first goal for the club to make it 2-0 early in the second half. At that point, the system was working perfectly. They were dominant.
Dominant teams win, though. They don't draw.
They didn't win because of an anomaly. We have to talk about Tomadozi, a 19-year-old making his Premier League debut, coming off the bench. He strikes a ball in the 94th minute that he probably couldn't replicate if you gave him 50 more tries. That is not a systemic failure of tactics. That is just the beautiful, terrible chaos of football. It was a turnaround that defied all the logic of the previous 80 minutes. To say this is a fatal blow ignores the fact that Arsenal is still top. A draw away from home is never a disaster in isolation. It is only a disaster if you view Manchester City as an infallible god. I prefer to analyze Arsenal's performance, which was controlled and high quality for long periods, rather than catastrophizing a stoppage time error.
Controlled? I think you are being dangerously charitable regarding the nature of that performance. I would call it complacent. And this brings us right to the core of our debate, the slow and lazy critique. We have to look at the analysis from Paul Merson in the aftermath of this game. He did not mince his words. He was scathing. He explicitly stated that Arsenal played in second gear. He called them slow and lazy. Now, you can brush that off as just punditry, but watch the tape. Were they controlling the game or were they sleepwalking?
Lazy is a very charged word, especially for this group. This is a team that has pressed with more intensity than almost anyone else in Europe this season. To call them lazy feels like a very emotional reaction to a bad result.
Made it 2-all. Suddenly, in the 96th minute, Arsenal wanted to play fast. But where was that urgency when it was 2-0? Where was it at 2-1? Merson's point is structural. He said if Arsenal plays fast, Wolves can't compete. That is a fact. We saw it in the first half. One touch, bang, goal. But in the second half, they chose consciously or unconsciously to drop the tempo. They played with a sort of arrogant nonchalance. You cannot be nonchalant in a title race. Merson warned that if you play in that slow manner, just retaining the ball without intent to hurt the opponent, you invite them back into the game. That isn't bad luck. That is bad application.
I think we really need to distinguish between laziness and game management that simply went wrong. You mentioned Hincapié's goal early on the second half. At that moment, the stadium basically went quiet. The game felt dead. It is entirely natural for a leading team to try to conserve energy, to control the space rather than purely attacking. It's the whole concept of resting on the ball. You keep possession, you make the opponent run, and you kill the clock. Merson says they were in second gear, but often that is exactly what champions do. They manage games to save their legs for the next one. The problem wasn't the tempo or the overall strategy. It was individual moments of madness that undermined that strategy.
But game management implies you are actually managing the risk. They lost control. Resting on the ball only works if you keep the ball securely and keep the opponent at arm's length. Arsenal started playing loose passes. They invited pressure.
They lost control in specific defensive actions, not in general play. The match report highlights a confusion between Gabriel and David Raya. That is a communication breakdown. That's a technical error, not a lack of effort. To label the entire squad as slow and lazy because of a defensive mix-up and a wonder moment from a debutant feels like retroactive analysis. You're fitting the narrative to the result. If Edozie's shot hits the post and bounces out, we are sitting here today talking about a professional, mature 2-1 win where Arsenal managed the game perfectly.
But we don't deal in ifs. It didn't hit the post. It went in, and it went in because Arsenal invited the pressure by not killing the game off. You cannot decouple the defensive error from the general lethargy of the play. Merson's critique strikes at the very heart of the mentality issue. He said you can't play like that. Every game is a cup final until the end. Arsenal treated the second half like a mid-season friendly once they went 2-0 up. That attitude is exactly what cost them. You mentioned game management, but true game management against the bottom club involves scoring the third goal and ending their hope entirely, not letting them hang around until the 94th minute. The fact that they allowed the worst team in the league to create extraordinary scenes of panic is proof that the slow and loose approach was fatal.
Okay, I admit the optics of the panic were bad. Seeing a manager like Arteta frozen is not what you want to see. But let's look at the idea of urgency that Merson brings up. He says urgency only arrived after the equalizer. I would argue that urgency is incredibly difficult to manufacture when you are 2-0 up and comfortable. The sudden shift in momentum, the turnaround, is a psychological phenomenon. Wolves had absolutely nothing to lose. They threw everything forward because why not? Arsenal had everything to lose. That dynamic often makes the leading team look slow, when in reality they are just paralyzed by the stakes. It's fear. It's not laziness.
And that fear is exactly why I believe the title is gone. Which brings us to our second point, the psychological shift in the concept of control. We're talking about a very specific timeline here, leading to nil, looking perfectly comfortable, and then the total collapse. Person warns, now things get serious with painful defeats and disastrous games. This draw feels like a defeat. It carries the emotional weight of a defeat. Can you imagine the dressing room after that?
It feels like a defeat, yes. I'll grant you that. But the league table relies on points, not feelings. And the table says they added a point to their tally.
A point that feels like a loss is often much worse than an actual loss. It hollows out your confidence. It makes you second-guess every decision in the next game. Consider the context provided in our analysis. This isn't just a one-off event. There's a trend developing, a draw away against Brentford, followed closely by this collapse against Wolves. Merson points out that this is the hardest phase of the season, the run-in. And in this hardest phase, Arsenal is showing regression. They are dropping points against teams they absolutely should beat. The momentum has shifted violently. You can feel it in the air. The narrative has moved entirely from Arsenal's title to lose to City's title to win.
I think we need to be very careful about buying into the narrative shift too heavily. Narratives change with the wind in football. Yes, the advantage of 2 goals was wasted. Yes, the opportunity to open a 7-point gap was squandered. That is undeniable. But Merson also said, every game is a cup final. In cup finals, strange things happen. Resiliency is about how you respond to the strange things. Arsenal are still the leaders. They still have the points on the board.
But where is the evidence of the resilience required to beat City? Where's the steel?
The evidence is in the season as a whole. One bad night at Molineux doesn't just erase months of quality. You are focusing heavily on the painful defeats aspect of Merson's warning, but I actually view his comment as a rallying cry. He is saying, wake up. This result, as painful as it is, strips away any illusion of comfort. Perhaps Arsenal actually needed that shock. Maybe the 2-0 lead made them too comfortable, a bit too arrogant. Now, with the gap gone, the clarity of the mission returns. They simply have to win. There is no more looking at the table and calculating cushions.
Simply have to win is very easy to say, but look who they are up against. This leads us directly to the mathematical reality we cannot ignore. The analysis is explicit. If City wins all their remaining games, they win the championship. That is the new reality. Before this game, Arsenal had a buffer. They could afford a draw at the Etihad or a slip-up somewhere else. Now, the margin for error is exactly 0. They have to be perfect.
I accept the math. If City wins out, they win. But let's actually discuss the probability of that event. The City perfection myth is so strong. We assume because they have done it before, they will automatically do it again. But this is football. Fatigue, injuries, Champions League distractions, these are all real factors. City are human beings. They aren't robots.
But you are betting against the house. They have done it before, repeatedly. That is exactly why this result is so catastrophic. You are banking on City failing rather than Arsenal succeeding. That is a fundamental position of weakness. Arsenal had the power in their own hands. They gave it away. That is the tragedy here. Merson noted that it is really very disappointing this night. That disappointment stems directly from the knowledge of who is chasing them. When you are being hunted by Manchester City, you cannot be casual. You cannot give away a 2-goal lead. Our analysis highlights that Arsenal wasted a 2-goal advantage that could have completely opened the title dispute. Instead of opening it up in their favor, they have blown it wide open for City. They invited the vampire into the house.
They wasted an advantage, yes, but let's look at the specifics of the Wolves' comeback again. I want to go back to that moment. A 19-year-old Tom Edozie, a debutant, a 94th minute goal. This is a massive statistical outlier. If we played this match 10 times, Arsenal wins 9 of them, very comfortably. You are arguing that a season of work is undone by a 1 in 1,000 event. It's incredibly hard to build a systemic failure argument on a lightning strike.
But titles are decided by those 1 in 1,000 events. That's the whole point. You don't get to replay the match 10 times. You get one night at Molineux. And on that night, Arsenal failed. They failed tactically by playing slow. They failed mentally by assuming the game was already won. And they failed technically with the Gabriel and Raya mix-up. That trinity of failure, tactical, mental, technical, against the bottom team in the league, That is the hallmark of a team that is not ready to be champions. Champions find a way to win when they play badly. Arsenal found a way to draw when they were playing well. That is the fundamental difference.
I challenge the idea that they are not ready. They are still leaders. They are still the team with the points on the board. You mentioned the Brentford game earlier, another away draw. But away games in the Premier League are notoriously difficult, even against struggling sides. Look at the atmosphere at Molineux or Brentford. These aren't walkovers. Arsenal is navigating the hardest phase, and yes, they have stumbled, but they haven't fallen off the cliff. Merson's critique about them being slow and lazy is a warning. It's not a eulogy.
It reads like a eulogy for their title chances, though. Look at the language Merson used. Disastrous games. He is categorizing this right alongside the worst moments of a season. The psychological damage of losing a lead that late simply cannot be overstated. When Tom Adozie put that ball in the net, he didn't just equalize for Wolves. He punctured the belief of the entire Arsenal squad. You saw it in Arteta's face. That wasn't just disappointment. That was realization. Realization that they had handed the initiative to a rival that doesn't forgive mistakes. He knows what Guardiola's teams do. He was there. He knows that when you give City an inch, they take the title.
I think you are projecting a whole lot onto Arteta's facial expression. Disbelief is a perfectly natural reaction to a 94th minute debut goal. It doesn't necessarily mean he thinks the title is gone. It means he can't believe the sequence of events, the mix-up, the deflection, the timing.
But the mix-up is the key, the confusion between Gabriel and Raya. These are your stalwarts. These are the guys who are supposed to be the absolute bedrock of the defense. When your bedrock cracks against the bottom team, the whole structure is unstable. If they can't communicate against Wolves, what happens when they play a top 4 side? What happens when the pressure is truly dialed up to the maximum?
Communication errors happen, even to the absolute best. The real question is, does this one error define the entire season? I argue no. I argue that the quality shown by Saka, the impact of Hincapie scoring, these are massive positives. Arsenal showed they can dominate. They just need to learn, and quickly, that the game isn't 80 minutes long, it's 95 minutes long.
And that lesson has come at the highest possible price. 2 points dropped. You say they just need to learn. You don't get time to learn in April or May. You don't get teachable moments during the run-in. You get results. And this result was a failure that I believe will look like the major turning point when we look back in May.
It was a failure of a result, absolutely, but not necessarily a failure of the campaign. The title race is tighter now. It's uncomfortably tight, but Arsenal are still well in the fight. Writing them off completely because of Tom Adozie's dream moment is, in my view, premature. Football is strange. City might draw next week. We just don't know.
We don't know for sure, but we can predict based on the evidence. And the evidence says City are ruthless, and Arsenal just showed a very soft underbelly. But, well, let's bring this to a close.
Yeah, I think we've covered the ground pretty thoroughly.
To summarize my position, this draw at Molineux was a self-inflicted wound that will likely prove fatal. The combination of complacency, what Merson called being slow and lazy, and the catastrophic defensive error between Gabriel and Raya has completely stripped Arsenal of their safety net. By allowing Manchester City to control their own destiny, Arsenal has effectively handed over the keys to the title. The lantern of the league has dimmed Arsenal's lights.
And I maintain that while the cushion is gone, the quality firmly remains. The result was a convergence of bad luck and a specific error, not a systemic collapse. Arsenal dominated for large periods, and a 94th minute equalizer from a debutant is a freak event. It's not a pattern. The race is certainly tighter, and the margin for error is exactly 0, but Arsenal is still the team to catch. If they can learn from the slow and loose play Merson criticized and return to their high-tempo best, they can still lift the trophy.
A big if, as they say. The margin for error is indeed 0. We will see if they can handle that pressure, or if Molineux was truly the beginning of the end.
Only time and the remaining fixtures will tell.
Thank you for joining us for the debate.
Goodbye.